I'd like to say a big thank you to our sponsors, because events like this can't happen without them. Thank you to Media Super for supporting the event tonight. In fact, there's more than just Media Super. Screen Australia, Australia Council of the Arts, the New Zealand Film Commission, and all the state agencies who've been on the screen that you've seen for supporting their state's attendance at the intimacy training earlier this week. My name's Michelle Ray, and I'm the Director of the Equity Section for MEA. Before we get talking about intimacy, I'd like to just have a quick chat about making local stories, Australian stories, our stories. It's a good opportunity to remind our policymakers and decision makers at a government level, our new ones, about the value of our craft and our art in telling stories. Did you know that the screen industry alone raises $5.34 billion? It employs more than 30,000 people. That makes us bigger than the mining industry. And with a new federal government heralds a new conversation. What we've been asking for is for our streamers to be given quotas, to make sure that they always make content. We acknowledge that they have been making content, and that's amazing and it's great. But if we don't have the quotas, then we are at the peril of the management of the streamers and their benevolence, not actually about our stories, our culture. So for the last 6 years, along with the other guilds, MEA, Screen Producers, the Writers Guild, the Directors Guild, we've been lobbying for quota content on the streamers, 20% of net profits being invested into our stories so that our children, our people get to see themselves on the screens. And without this safeguard, imagine no Australian stories. 20% would provide 300 hours and 10,000 more jobs. We're already bigger than the mining industry. It's time to be bigger. The new government says they want to work with us, but without those content quotas in place, we don't have our security. And more work for everyone is a really good thing. Because when performers are at work, making amazing stories come to life, it's important we ensure that everyone on that workspace is safe. And that's what tonight's conversation's about. The intimacy coordinator and director, the role of. That role is about empowering performers and creatives to work together to keep the space safe and make amazing stories. So let me introduce you to our speakers that will be here tonight. Alicia Rodis pioneered the role of intimacy coordinator in the United States. I wonder if she knew she was a pioneer. She serves as the intimacy coordinator for HBO Studios, consulting on their policies and protocols, as well as training and vetting the ICs working on HBO sites. And she's been here for nearly 10 days, 11 days, working with our intimacy coordinators who've been going through the training program. And with her is Claire Warden. Claire works as an intimacy coordinator on television networks, including HBO, Hulu, Amazon, Showtime, as well as major motion picture studios such as Sony and the 20th Century Fox. Claire made history as the first intimacy director on Broadway. But we can't just let them chat, because they might just chat among themselves. So to guide the conversation with them tonight is director Neil Sharma, mentored by the likes of Oscar-winning auteur Taika Waititi and actor award winner Jeffrey Walker. Neil's directing credits include the forthcoming reboot of be still my heartbreak high. Yeah, I'm that age. With Netflix, The Unlisted with Netflix, Appetite with SBS, Born to Spy, ABC Aquarius Films, and Splinter Unit for Lambs of God, Foxtel Showtime. Enough from me. Let's hear from these three amazing people. Good luck, Neil.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us in the room and online as well. Very grateful for everyone's time, and very grateful for Alicia and Claire for joining us as well. I know you guys had a very early start, and you fly tomorrow as well. So
not as early as you, apparently.
No. We won't play that game. It's depressing, but no, thank you. We are very grateful because you are, as we just heard, pioneers in the field of intimacy coordinating, and it would be amazing to hear your thoughts on where the current industry is heading, and your role in the future of the industry. So we'll kick it off because I'm sure everyone has a lot of questions, but let's start with a very obvious one of what is an intimacy coordinator and what do you do? Alicia, if you want to, I'll throw you onto the bus first.
Oh, go on then. Sure. So an intimacy coordinator in general is a liaison between actors and production, an advocate, and a movement choreographer for scenes of intimacy, namely often nudity and simulated sex, but also it can go along the spectrum of different types of intimacy, depending on what is needed for that specific production.
And just to kind of throw in a clarify, because you may hear us talk about intimacy coordinators and intimacy directors. Intimacy coordinators work on camera, so that's TV, film work. Intimacy directors work in live performance, theatre, dance, opera, and with a similar baseline of that work. Advocates, liaisons, and choreographers in the ways that it shifts in the medium, different mediums.
Brilliant. And you touched on the point before, but it seems like there is a spectrum of what an intimate scene is, because when you hear intimacy coordinator, you assume it's just sex scenes and anything of that nature. But run us through what an intimate scene is and the spectrum of.
Sure. So, it's up to different productions and different studios, and eventually, hopefully, our unions will more so specifically dictate when an intimacy coordinator is necessary. I can speak to at least HBO Studios protocols that if there is a nudity or simulated sex scene, if there is any form of nudity or any form of simulated sex, or a rider is implemented, then an intimacy coordinator must be there. That is our bottom floor of the mandate. However, and we find this on a lot of productions, they're anything from a kiss to a really intensive, say, childbirthing scene, etc. We have found the use and efficiency on set, but also just the use of everyone's comfort and safety of having an intimacy coordinator there as well. So, in general, a lot of, and some of it is really depending on the context of the scene, but also the actors, whether they be perhaps younger or specifically asking for the assistance of an intimacy coordinator. So we leave it up to the discretion of the actors, directors, and producer. If someone requests an intimacy coordinator to be present, then we will have one and then go through those protocols.
Is it similar for the theatre world as well?
Yeah, pretty much. We tend to say nudity or hyperexposure, which includes there's a societal definition of nudity, which, sometimes is explained as whatever is covered by a bathing suit that you would wear. So breasts, genitals, and buttocks. But for us, hyperexposure will also include any part of the body that an actor would not normally expose, whether that be for cultural reasons or religious reasons or their own personal protection reasons. So it also includes something that would feel as vulnerable as nudity can also be in part of that. And again, like any simulated sex, or we're still trying to really nail the phrase. For me, I'm like intense physical intimacy, whether that be medical intimacy, like medical procedures, the you know, a bathing scene, if you're bathing someone, all those procedural, you know, this procedure, this is TV now, but like, you know, playing playing the dead body on the examiner's slab, right? Not sexual, very exposed, and also you can't move, right? So you can't stop people doing anything to you whilst the work's happening. So something that might be that kind of vulnerable is also what we play with.
There's also been a couple of situations that we've talked about, and we've talked about this a lot in some of the SAG-AFTRA podcasts that we did. There was a specific situation on Westworld that came up that was just a man who was touching the back of the head of a young boy. However, the context of the scene was this was a pedophile, and all that we saw was him placing his hand on the back of the head of a child. But even just because of the specific context of that, the director and the actor said, can we have someone here to really talk through exactly what this is and specifying what it was? And they employed the show's intimacy coordinator, Ma'am Smith, at the time to come in and just work through that. And everyone found a lightness to being able to really just talk through exactly what that was.
Yeah, because there is such, or I guess you don't know at the time, but there can be so much trauma involved with physical touch, and you don't know who you're dealing with at the time as well. So it's incredibly important. And I guess how it makes sense that in today's climate and temperature, when we're talking about film and TV and theatre as well, it makes sense that this position exists. But it also makes no sense that it only exists probably in the last, 4 or 5 years, really, that I've kind of heard about it. So how did you get involved, and how did you kind of kick off this movement? Single-handedly.
So definitely not single-handedly. There's definitely a village and collective and cultural movement that really pushed this along. Personally, I started off as an actor, going to conservatory for acting. Started working as a movement director and fight director, mostly for theater. And then I started getting involved in the stunt world when I moved to New York. And while I was doing this, honestly, from the time I was around 13, 14, when I was cast in a show, I was often cast as the slutty best friend. So even from the time of being like 14 years old, I was already put into very sexualized positions at different times. I had my first nude scene when I was 18 in a theater. You know, I was nude in a student film like that same year. You know, I found in these situations that there was not a lot of support. And that doesn't mean that even necessarily I was very fortunate. I had very supportive folks that were even working with me, but there was no language around anything. And I found that I was often cast over and over again in these roles because of just the certain type that I exuded, but also because I was so comfortable in it and found myself comforting the directors that would be directing me. So as I started working as a fight director, I also found that being a woman, they were like, oh, thank God you're a woman. Can you talk about this rape scene? Can you handle this? And, you know, I kept thinking like, surely we have some other protocol. Surely we have something else that is down at the bare minimum for when we were handling these scenes. And I started working a lot for the NYU film department with some of the other stunt folks that I started to get involved with, just helping out student films with small things, slaps and fight scenes and stuff like that. And one of my students came to me and said, I've got a sex scene coming up. What do you think I should do? And I was like, well, let's look at what the protocols are for a sex scene. Okay, we got no protocols for a sex scene. Let's treat this like the stunt that we just did. Okay, let's talk to the actors ahead of time. Let's make sure they know exactly what they're getting into. Let's chat about it. And my own experience as being in stunts and getting hired even as a day player on a show, the stunt coordinator was my liaison. That was my person who was, you know, would call me up and be like, hey, that 6-foot low fall you're doing, it's actually an 8-foot low fall. How do you feel about that? You know, I get in on the day and they would be checking in with me and being like, hey, how are you feeling? This is what's going on. We're 2 scenes away. And then advocating for me every step of the way. And then I would come on to do a a nude scene for, you know, doing background on Boardwalk Empire and being like, is someone going to tell me when not to take my top off? As a lot of the ADs, they don't necessarily have that language. So anyway, as this started to, you know, continue forward, I looked up Tonya Sina, who had written her thesis in 2006 on intimacy, on what she called intimacy choreography. And her and I met in an apartment in Brooklyn and spent about 7 hours together. And she said, you want to start doing this? I was like, let's do it. And we created a company, and we created the pillars. And just started putting the work down. And, you know, I was very lucky, very fortunate in a lot of ways that I was in the right place at the right time with the right set of skills. And I learned very quickly, and I pushed buttons where I was able to push buttons. And we started to get some attention. People started wanting to do our workshops, but they weren't really going for it, you know. Claire had joined with us at this point, and it wasn't really getting there. And then Me Too happened. And then Trump got elected, and then Me Too happened. And specifically, there was something that really shifted, especially in the US, but I'm sure around the world during that time, that made everyone go, oh, we've got a problem culturally. And that was when we started getting the calls in. That was when people started going, hey, you know that thing you were talking about? We actually need a little bit more help on this. And shortly after that, I was hired on The Deuce, and that is a whole other story. But yeah.
Was it a similar journey for you, Claire?
In a way, I've been an actress my whole career. Trained in England and then moved to the States 14 years ago. And when I moved to the States, that's when I began training and then working as a fight director for theatre, and an acting teacher specializing in Shakespeare, but quickly ended up doing a lot of work with actors, with physical, psychological, and emotional trauma, and working with them on how to manage their trauma while working, and how to find ways to be in choice of what was available for their work, and how to care for and manage what wasn't at that moment available to be used in their work. And then in early 2017, there was an article in the New York Times about Tonya's work in a show in a festival up in Canada. And I read the article, or I don't know whether I just read it or someone sent it to me and said, you should look at that. And I should remember who that person was, because they actually changed my life. They changed my entire life. Thanks, whoever you were. And I read this article, and it was one of those moments where, as I was reading about some of like Tonya's work and what she was bringing, I was like, oh, that's what I was put here to do. Like the combination of the work I did and also like who I am as a person, it just seemed, I was like, I want to help that and support that. So I reached out to Tonya, and Alicia and I had a long phone conversation.
You got to tell and
what
Claire,
we
I
were
just want
doing.
to say, was instrumental in bringing trauma-informed work into the work we were doing in intimacy
Amazing.
work. But when she called me,
yeah, so I'd been emailing with Tonya, and she was a little sick. She was sick at the time, so she said, "Look, have a conversation with Alicia." So I called Alicia, and Alicia is currently. Where were you? Cincinnati?
I was in Virginia. I was doing a stunt show, a Three Musketeers stunt show, playing D'Artagnan at the time.
And I was about to go off and play Tybalt in Romeo and Juliet in Connecticut. So
both playing these originally male roles in these like fight shows,
and we were like, hey, I think this is gonna work. So we had a long conversation, and we're like, great, when we both get back, let's get together. And I was like, look, I deeply believe in what you're doing. I think I can help. I have a lot to offer. And I'm a bit of a kind of door kicker, downer, warrior, burn this shit down and make it better person. And I was like, I would like to add that to this movement if you would be interested in it. And then whilst I was
hiring shit kicker down.
yes, yeah. And I'm like, there's a vacancy. And then whilst I was doing that show in New Haven, I happened to be connected with the head of the chair of drama at Yale School of Drama, who had heard from a friend about my fight work and wanted to kind of talk with me. So we met. And in one of those conversations, and I said, so, hey, what have you got coming up? And he said, one of our MFA playwrights has written this play, and there's a lot of sex in it, and it's really kind of heavy and involved. And honestly, I'm not sure what to do and how to do this. And I said, it's interesting you say that, Walt, because I've just met these women who have something that we might be able to help you. So let me know. And a few weeks later, he calls and he's like, I think we need your help. And this was a play called Slave Play by Jeremy O. Harris, which went on after that, a year later, went on to off-Broadway and then Broadway, and is now about to take the international circuit, I think, in America, and his other plays are international. And so I called, and it's a lot. And I called, and it's about a premise of antebellum sexual performance therapy between interracial couples. And so I
sounds like it needs an
coordinator. Yeah. And so I called Alicia and I'm like, should we go work on this play? And that was kind of that was, I think, where we really kind of sparked the road into the theater side of raising up and moving kind of through the echelons of theater with that.
And M. Weinstein, who was the first director of that, actually just finished directing a couple episodes on the L Word.
Yes.
So has been doing amazing things since that. I just wanted to give that shout out.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, we're so grateful that journey happened and that here we are now. It's funny because you both kind of mentioned coming up as actors or through the stunt world, and there's such a reverence for the process of stunt work, like you were kind of talking about. And a stunt sequence will often be prevised, and there'll be weeks of rehearsal, and there'll be discussions, and it's planned to a T before you ever even walk onto set. Everyone knows what's happening, and yeah, it's one of those things where everyone kind of stops and makes sure everything's happening really well. Yeah. Which I'm guessing is kind of where we'd like to see the intimacy role, intimacy coordinator role get to. There's also a lot of,
sorry, just to interrupt. I just, you make me think it's really, for me, I'm ever curious about our differing relationship as a society with violence.
true,
and with sex.
absolutely,
Right. And the amount of sensation, but also the willingness in the performance world to look at the craft of creating the story of violence and how willingly creatives are to talk about it and really get in there. And then when you look at sex, which lives in a very similar place in our experience and bodies, and we're like, so should we have a talk about what this might look? And it was like, no, we don't want to talk about that. No. Or you can't talk about it because the only way it can look good is if we do it for real. And you would just never kind of, now you would never even suggest that to a director. It's just not
imagine
done.
having the same chat about a stunt.
Exactly. You're like, can't they just both
through the
jump?
window? It's fine.
Yeah.
Like, why just hit each other until we'll tell you when we've got something we like. Just keep hitting each other.
It's crazy to say it out aloud, but that's exactly where we're kind of at. There's also a lot of training that goes behind being a stunt person or a coordinator in the stunt world, and rightfully so, because people's lives are at danger and in people's hands. Similarly, the training to become an intimacy coordinator or director is pretty thorough. I think there's a bit of a misconception that because it's a burgeoning field, there's not a lot of kind of qualifications needed before you can be properly certified. Can you shed some light on what you actually need to be a legitimate coordinator?
Yeah, and I think a little bit of perhaps the misunderstanding comes from the kind of lack of putting together a connection of how far it crosses all the aspects of creating that scene. So, you know, there's a lot of, there is an understanding of like the concept of consent and how to be a consent advocate. And even within that, the understanding, the study of power dynamics and how power dynamics can affect consent, the understanding of trauma-informed approach, both a somatic trauma-informed approach, but also an understanding of emotional trauma, and how to create communication that that encourages support and a consent-based conversation as opposed to coercion or convincing. That's one part of it. And alongside with that is an understanding of like, so we believe, and this is also like now been adopted by SAG-AFTRA, the Actors Union in America. There is mental health first aid training qualification. So all of our IDs and ICs have to be trained in mental health first aid, in that trauma-informed practice, in consent advocacy. There is the kind of dramaturgical information, right? So there must be understanding of sexual dramaturgy. There must be understanding training of working with, working in an anti-racist way, working with both storylines and members of the LGBTQIA community. Then we also have like the technical aspect of choreography, and the kind of specific parts of choreography, which I think is where a lot of the fight training has become so useful, is the specific physical storytelling and what's called masking. So making the thing look like it's the thing when not doing the thing, right? Making it look like I just slapped you across the face because the angle's here and we're covering, making it look like we're performing this sex act without performing the sex act. So there's a choreography aspect of it.
Yeah, and that's without even getting into the production protocols and how to work within a production, because especially with a new role that is being brought into production, you have to have such a supreme understanding of how a production works, what pre-production looks like, what days on set looks like, and how to work as seamlessly as possible within that, both as, you know, being an advocate and assisting and collaborating with the scene without trying to take it over or step on toes with the director, and et cetera, et cetera.
It is such a collaboration, isn't it? Because you walk on a set and there's time constraints and, you know, you've got to work with directors and ADs and then the cast and then producers and everyone else. We'll get a bit more into that, but if you wouldn't mind telling me the process. So you've been hired, you're fully certified, you're qualified, you've been hired by a production. What's the day-to-day running and what is the process once you're booked onto a job?
I will say the ideal.
What's the dream
scenario? The ideal, please, is that hiring happens at pre-production, right? That's something that's, I talk a fair amount about kind of preloading. The more preloading and prep we can do, the smoother it runs for everybody. And the more we are able to create a consent-based process. So that production idea, that hiring happens at pre-production so that we can be in production meetings, so that we can, we know the schedule and when the scenes that we might be working on are coming up, so that we can schedule individual conversations with all of the actors that are going to be in the scene so that we can have those consent conversations, understand their boundaries and needs so that we can individually support them. We've had a chance to talk with the director and understand their visions and requests and wants for the scene so that we can take those to the actors when we have our conversations, and that we can have that that conversation outside of the power dynamic of director to actor. Because you can have the best intentions in the world as a director and really do your best to uphold a consent-based space. But the way the industry is structured, there is an inherent power dynamic that when a director asks for something, especially vulnerable work, that really needs very kind of nuanced navigating in order to be able to provide consent in that situation.
And that being said, you know, something that we at least have in the HBO protocols is that it's a conversation with the director about how do you want to approach this? Would you like to talk with the actors first? You know, first of all, what do they know? What has been requested so far? And then do you want to talk to the actors first? Would you like me to talk to them afterwards? Would you like us to all talk together and talk out what your vision is? And then regardless, I'll just have a sidebar with each actor afterwards, just in case there's anything that they're like, you know what, the director doesn't need to know this, but I just want to make sure. And you have that opportunity with them. And if I may, even going earlier than that, and this is something that we have had, it's kind of been a luxury having me embedded within the studio, is that even before, we might not even be in prep yet and they'll be in the casting process. And I've gotten calls from production saying, so we are casting this one role, there's a lot of nudity and simulated sex, can you talk to our folks that are in the final running for this role so that they are very clear on what it is we need from them before they even accept the role or before we even offer a role to them.
And that's interesting you've mentioned the casting process, because often there's chemistry tests and, you know, there's intimate scenes essentially being shot as an audition. Are you involved in that early stages of thing, or is it important to be?
There are, luckily now there are more and more, and this is happening a little more in the theatre now as well, there are more protocols around what you are allowed to ask for in auditions in terms of intimacy and intimate scenes.
SAG-AFTRA in the 2020 most recent negotiations, they added more protocols around that.
Yeah. As well as nudity, like what nudity can be required, and the levels of nudity and who is in the room if that is happening. So it's helpful that these protocols are coming because actors are able to look somewhere and know exactly what their rights are and what can and can't be asked of them, and ensure that that is happening.
Shout out to New Zealand and Australia, who also have the intimacy guidelines that they have created that also really specifically states what goes on with auditions as well.
Brilliant. It's probably a great time to mention that MEAA has all of this on their website as well. I know the guidelines are up there, so make sure you check it out. Anyone that's curious and needs to know. Brilliant.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's fine. And then, so chatty, done that. And then the kind of liaison part of the job as well is, you know, that conversation with wardrobe to talk through what we call modesty garments. So parts that are, you know, parts of the body that actors have not consented to show, we cover. And so the kind of liaising with that department, liaising with sometimes props, depending on what's being used.
Sometimes VFX.
Sometimes VFX.
Depending on what it is we're working with.
So all that kind of, anyone whose work might be involved in this intimate scene. So we're ensuring that if the information is being shared in the way that everyone has what they need to be able to do their job whilst upholding the consent process. And then, you know, the day on set, ensuring that we have, this is on set, ensuring we have a closed room. If it's for theatre, that the closed rehearsal protocols are being followed. So limiting the people that are in the room while we're doing the work on this, supporting the crew as well, whilst we're there, especially if it's a scene of non-consensual sex or sexual violence. To witness that as a crew member is asking a lot. So also ensuring that there's support for crew as well as for performers.
Yeah, and what we have found has been really useful, and we do this at HBO, and a lot of intimacy coordinators put this in outside of HBO as well, is making sure that closed set is stated on the call sheet, but also having closed set protocols as a memo. Because, you know, you get a memo if we have animals on set, if we have, you know, smog effects, etc. So having a closed set memo as well that just delineates like, this scene is going to be a closed set. This is what this means. If you have any questions, you can go to first AD or intimacy coordinator, and here's my number.
Absolutely. And it is really important as well, because as you mentioned, it can be quite triggering for people who aren't just the actors. I know we're speaking about this in the context of actors, and our audience are probably majority actors as well. But, you know, you do work and deal with the entire crew.
Yeah.
And in my experience, it's been really great knowing that, you know, you have someone to hold your hand and guide you through the process as a director. So a selfish question, do you have advice for directors and emerging directors, you know, young and old, working in these scenes? Because I was lucky enough to work with Chloe Dallimore, who was amazing.
Yeah,
We love Chloe.
We do love Chloe. And it was brilliant because it was such a daunting experience for me, never having directed sex scenes, of which there were a few, and Heartbreak High, for instance. But what I found was great about it was that, you know, everyone was empowered. It's probably the greatest word for it. And it helped us get the creative best out of that scene in ways that I didn't think I'd be able to. But again, like, I was never trained in that aspect. I would have loved a little bit of advice my damn self. So do you have any advice for directors and other crew members in that situation?
A few things I would say. I think to allow yourself to allow the IC to help you, or the ID to help you. Like, we're there as a support to the director. It's okay. I feel there's a lot of expectation for directors to be able to have all the answers and do and know everything. And if you can't direct the sex scene, then you're not a good director. And you're like, but you wouldn't say, great, also director, go do this stunt scene. And then director, can you make sure that the fog comes in the right way? Oh, and also while you're there, director, can you just fix these costumes? Like, allow that department to be your support and to collaborate with them. And ask. If you don't know, ask questions. If you don't know what language to use, if you're not sure how to run it, if you need a little bit of support yourself in this. I've worked with directors who are themselves survivors of sexual assault, who are directing a sexual assault scene and are just like, I don't feel I have the right to take care of myself in this moment, but this is really difficult and can be triggering for them. So like, allowing yourself to be a human and an artist and collaborate. And I will also say that the company we work with, IDC, our mission is to equip all artists with the education to create consent-based workspaces. And yes, we do train like IDs and ICs, but we also offer training in just consent and understanding consent and creating a consent-based workspace. And if that's something that would give you more confidence, and then like being able to seek out some training yourself, some professional development training in that way, I think just kind of gives you a vocabulary, gives you an understanding and a way to kind of lean deeper into that work.
Yeah, and I might say treat the intimacy coordinator or intimacy director as a resource for you, but
I couldn't agree anymore.
and also tall order. There is a lot of shame that can come up in just confronting an intimate scene. And a lot of times I've met with directors who don't want to share a vision for the scene and it might be just culturally, personally, whatever, we are all victims of shame of just in sexual culture. That you are entitled to a vision. You're entitled to a vision of this scene, even as flexible as you may be in what that vision is. It is still can be a beautiful part of humanity that we are telling a story of, and sharing that with the cast and the folks that you are working with and collaborating on it is really an awesome thing. This is just another story we're telling, like anything else.
That's such a great point. I feel like a deviant at the best of times, so that was really reassuring. Thank you. Do you kind of come up against resistance or a lot of resistance on set or ever with?
Not as much as we used to.
Right. Well,
Very
that's a
much
push in the
so.
right direction. How do you deal with that, and what type of resistance is it? Generally from actors who feel like they don't need it, or directors who feel like they don't need it?
Both. It depends on the situation. A way that I have chosen to go about it is first leading with empathy, because often when there is resistance, there is fear. And also I'm a big proponent of leaning into that, and also asking, if I'm feeling resistance, naming it and saying, what do you have any concerns about this process? Do you have any concerns about working with an intimacy coordinator? Have you worked with one before? And allowing them a space to really talk through what concerns they might have. And then giving clarity to how it is that I work, or how it is that the intimacy coordinator that's going to be on set with them is going to work. Outside of that, and I feel we talked about this earlier today, but with actors, when actors shutting off and shutting down any part of the process, I try to find whatever way it is that is going to be the way in with that person, and to also assure them I'm happy to work within their process as an actor. I'm not here to get in the way of the process. And that regardless of how comfortable or confident they may feel, and they may have absolutely no boundaries, their scene partner still may have boundaries, and we're going to at least uphold those.
I have found with a lot of resistance that I have met, and I still do, whether it be director, actor, crew members, I need this. I find that a lot of the time, it stems from not quite understanding what this role is, or what we're there for, or how it works. And a fear that we're there to censor people, or we're there to control, or we're there to take the director's job, and or that there's something wrong or a failure in the actor if they need support. And I find that, as Alicia said, kind of being empathic to that, and also just like, great, and let's just keep going along the process with them. Often once they've seen it in action and they understand what it is, that resistance tends to melt away. Whether it be, the director be like, oh, you didn't try to take my job, and in fact, I don't have to have that conversation. I don't have to say those words. I can just be like,
become an asset.
Yeah. And the actors finding that, that with confidence comes freedom to do their best work. And even crew members being like, oh, I didn't realize I could relax when we're doing this kind of work.
I have yet to meet a resistant boom op.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
It's just like, oh, hey.
Yeah.
I love it. Look, I could probably ask you 40,000 more questions, but I dare say the audience at home and in this room may have a bunch. So I might pass it over to, if anyone does have any questions, just raise your hand. Hey.
I'm not sure if you can answer this, but I'm just wondering how your work has resonated in continental Europe, because when you talk about things like we all have a degree of sexual shame, I think we need to acknowledge that some of those degrees are cultural as well. I don't know if you can answer it, but I'd be very interested.
A little bit. I've had some interactions with some people in France and in Italy and in Spain. You know, there are those that are really interested in bringing this work to the countries, and the challenge there is the culture, both within the film industries, a really strong conditioning of expectation of actors and especially actresses to be okay with this and to like be told that being nude and just getting on with sex, actual sex, is just part of being a good actor. So there's a lot of kind of the challenge there is bringing the conversation into the industry. Finland, seem up for it. We've got a Finnish, we have a Finnish person who is about to be certified as an ID training at the moment and is bringing that, and there is real interest in the work in Finland. Yay, Finland. And I think what's important and what we talk about a lot is, you know, yes, we want to share the approach and policies of consent with the worldwide industry, but we have, whenever you want to introduce something to another country culture, we have to be really respectful of that culture. Right, Alicia will, you know, use the phrase sometimes like, we don't want to be intimacy colonizers, right? We're not like going in and going, you should do it this way, the way we do it in England or in the US. So so the work and the conversations and the shift needs to happen from within the community about the culture, in order to then find shifts in the industry to move a little towards that. And my French isn't good enough yet. But there is definite, like, there is a determined want, and I hope that we'll, you know, that the worldwide intimacy community and we can be of support to keep that going.
Yeah, and I will at least name that there are multiple productions in Europe that are HBO productions or at least co-productions with HBO studios that have adopted intimacy coordinator protocols on their sets. Some of it really goes down to, and this is something that we have come up against, is the idea that sex work is part of an actor's job, which sometimes the bare minimum of that is contract. That is, I'm sorry, but on a SAG-AFTRA set, there are no actual sex acts that will be. So right now that is off the table already. So we are already going to be talking about exactly how this is simulated and how we are going to be working here in a matter that is appropriate to the contracts that you are working. So all ethics, et cetera, philosophies aside, it sometimes is based down to a contract.
We've got quite a few questions online. One of them, what is mental health first aid? That comes from Karen.
Mental health first aid is a training and a qualification, kind of like your, you know, a first aid, CPR, you know, that I'm trained that if I come across someone who's, you know, fallen down and gashed open their leg, I can dress it and stem the bleeding until an ambulance arrives, right? It's the same kind of training in that if someone is having a mental health crisis, I have trained in approaches and techniques that can try and keep them out of danger to themselves or others, and bring them to a state of enough manage and balance until a professional can come and help them, or they can find the resources to help them. So it is not treatment, but it is triage. You know, it is a first aid responder for mental health crisis.
And if I may give a shout out, at least the American practice of this is from the company that started it in Australia.
Yes.
Because in 2015, when we started taking these courses, they were all Australian videos that they were showing. And yeah,
What
yeah.
company is that?
Some of them were really Thrive. They're
Thrive
called
and mental health first aid. Yeah, yeah. Which was is still free to take in New York City. So if you're ever in New York City, that is completely free. I imagine, actually believe it is many places. It's just amazing when you get something free that is state or federally given in the States.
I don't know if it is still here in Australia. I don't know. Look it up. Thrive.
No, it is.
No, it's not. Cecily's
Oh,
saying
it's not free in Australia.
but it is still offered. The show must go on.
Great.
Thanks, Cecily.
Thank you.
We have another one from Crew. What's the strangest scene you've ever had to work on?
Define strange.
Shame coming back into it now.
Let's just going through the files.
I mean, there was a flying sex scene. I'm not sure if that was strange, but it was quite challenging. I can say it's coming out.
Episode 5
Yeah.
of Lovecraft Country,
There you go.
the whole episode.
I just filmed hate sex on a cake. That was messy and a little strange, but I think it's gonna be amazing when it comes out.
How many cakes were there?
We had, and it was a unicorn head cake. We had 4 entire cakes plus extra cake matter to place. And the reset, because it was falling into the cake and then the cake being smushed all over. The resets were intense.
It's probably the only day the crew didn't eat the
Yeah,
the
yeah,
crew filming.
yeah. I was like, you know what? No, I'm gonna let that go.
No one told the boomy on that day.
Yeah. But yeah, that was awesome.
I'm sure you get this question all the time from how do you become a certified trained intimacy coordinator?
There are actually a number of companies that you can go through, and I would really, I hate to send you all to Google, but truly there are a number of companies out there, both in in the US, in the UK, in Australia, in Canada, South Africa. So I would just say start looking up intimacy coordinator training, intimacy director training, and start looking, because it is a lot of names, and I don't want to leave anyone out. And I also, yeah.
And what's really great as this kind of continued diversity of training is that there's slightly different approaches or different things that are the ways that they teach. So, also look into how do you like to learn, or what matters to you, and what training seems to speak to that as much, as long as it has like the breadth of training and experience that will set you up for responsible, ethical success in the role.
And always be side training, as far as, there's so much we can learn from cultural consultants, from other mental health first aid trainers, etc. There is, we are all on a continued journey as artists and as practitioners to just continue to better ourselves.
Is it a process of needing a certain amount of hours on set? Are there like attachments and things like that you need to do?
Well, it absolutely depends on each company and how it is they've decided to dictate their system. And I will be honest, like at HBO, I have multiple intimacy coordinators that we work with that are not certified by a certain company, but they are qualified. They have had an extreme amount of training, either with some of those companies or outside of it, or and have also successfully shadowed or assisted and then done days as an intimacy coordinator. I named Mam Smith, who is one of the most fantastic intimacy coordinators we have, who just did the first season of The Idol, the last season of Euphoria, Westworld before that. She's not a certified intimacy coordinator, but she comes from 20 years in the stunt industry and as an actor and aerialist, and also came with a immediately started training with multiple companies and is, I'd go into war with her.
Yeah.
So it's
Really?
really about accountability on yourself partially, but also being able to get in there and start working a certain amount of days. And some people, depending on their set experience, it might take a few days, and some it might take a longer time period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I will say that because you are navigating and working within either a theater world or a film world, and because you need to know the system before you can successfully disrupt it, it is very useful to have experience within that world, whichever one it is, before you begin the training, the kind of intimacy coordinator specific training, to understand the language, the approach, the systems, different processes, like how it kind of works in each of those.
And theater as well for intimacy direction.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's that I have found really sets you up for success, to have a decent amount, and just in the room, directing, stage manager, wardrobe person, a PA on set,
Just the minutiae of how
camera,
a set runs.
just understand, especially in film, because it's such a whirlwind and there's so much jargon and there's so particular ways that it works, and there's so much to understand that it's so easy to get lost if you're not really firmly on your feet in that. It's really hard to then advocate for people while you're trying to figure out who's doing what and what that is and what this person over here does, and what do you mean, you're doing what with the heat. So so that we have found is a very important aspect of the training, is really understanding the medium.
Brilliant. Any more questions?
Hold on. I'll just read one more question and
Yeah,
then I'll
sure.
run up to you. One of the key reasons for resistance is cost, but there is evidence to suggest that engaging in IC actually makes the process more efficient. Comment?
Yes. I would also offer a shift on that first sentence, which I think the reason given is cost. I think the key resistance is a lack of valuing the support of your actors. And so I would encourage a re-examination of that. It's amazing when those that have the money place some value on something, how the money can appear for it or how it can be redistributed, right? Can always find the money for that extra effect or this particular wardrobe prop or something. So once the value is understood, and I believe the value of a consent-based workspace affects every single person through the whole process, then the attribution of funds is a lot of an easier process for those that have the purse strings.
And I imagine that if the plan were, as you guys set it out in that ideal scenario where you're embedded in production from an early stage, when you get to set, it's a very quick, seamless process.
Yeah, it is. And it doesn't take, all you're paying is like one extra crew member,
yeah,
for the day they're on set and their prep. And you can build that budget from the beginning so that you can build the budget into it.
And by episode 3, it's like, yep, this is how we work.
Yeah.
This is how it goes.
Well-oiled machine.
Yeah, I was just wondering, have you ever been in a situation where you've worked for an organization where you may have felt like they've ticked a box to get an intimacy ID or IC, and so that resistance is kind of in the culture of the organization? So it's not only resistance perhaps from actors or the director, but yeah, have you ever been in a situation where you found it really hard to do your job?
Yes. Regularly. Again, less now, right? Less and less. And then it's a choice, the kind of the work and the choice then I think is, and I think what really, again, it's this preloading. What really helps is that first conversation explaining, great, really looking forward to working with you. Here's the protocols. Here's how this works. Here are the people I need to have the meetings with. This is where the access I'm going to need. This is how it works. So to kind of encourage that conversation up front, and then with that buy-in and with that, you can then start to educate. That's what we do a lot. And that's part of our role as ones that are like towards the head of the industry, is to be doing that education work with the producers and with the companies of what and why.
Something that HBO does, that so it's embedded in their process because it's in the intimacy protocols for the whole studio, is that before the show even starts, before the season even starts, there is a meeting between myself and the producers of the show so that they understand what the process is and how this is going to work before they get the intimacy coordinator or start interviewing to hire the intimacy coordinator for that production. So, you know, and I would just suggest setting your expectations and boundaries as an IC or an ID in the pre-production process, so that just like the actors we are advocating for, you have your boundaries, you have your minimums. This is what I absolutely need. And I know at least in the early days and even now, at least the intimacy coordinators and intimacy directors that we work with a lot on the East Coast have set a standard of, if I don't have access to the director, if I don't have access to the actors before we even get on set that day, you don't want an intimacy coordinator and we're not going to come and do this job.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
I think the AD in me is kicking in. Should we 2 more questions?
Just on that with the intimacy director, is it you come on you work out the scene with the actors and the directors, but is there an ongoing relationship you have with the production as the whole run goes and they go on tour, and as the show kind of weaves and molds itself into another kind of being? Is the intimacy director involved in touching base with the production also?
I mean, yeah, it can vary production to production depending on the agreements that are made, but generally what we're doing, what's the kind of the difference in the intimacy direction and in theater, is that we are building something with the team in the rehearsal room that is repeatable and stays the same every single night, 8 times a week for however long that show is going. And so it's often more choreographed and it's really specific. And what we're doing is building the structure that continues throughout the run, throughout the tours, no matter what house we're in, wherever we're going. And we've also, you know, built it with the understudies and the swings. And if a new cast member comes in, then we will go in and ensure that that structure works for them and is repeatable. And so the show kind of takes care of itself in that way, in the same way as the dance numbers are the same each time and the fight work is the same each time. We're not just kind of deciding to like throw a couple of extra bars of tango in here because we felt it that night. And then the maintenance of the show, which is often done by the stage managers or the residential director, if there is one, resident director over here, is just checking that structure is keeping. And if it starts to drift or if it starts to shift a little bit, then we're like reminding you of the choreography, reminding you of the length of that kiss, reminding you that, you know, this is happening. I saw that shifted. What went on? So you have that. Some intimacy directors do occasionally go in. I was working on a company Sondheim's company on Broadway, which closed a couple hours ago. But throughout the process, we've checked in, and if we've had it was quite a physical scene in one. So there was like, oh, we want to just do a little adjustment here because Katrina's neck's starting to ache a little bit. Can we shift this? Or we have a new understudy in, then I'll pop in for rehearsals and we'll put them through the track and we'll work that out. And sometimes if it's off on tour, I'm like, Godspeed, call me if you need me. And they're off.
But just to specify, the intimacy director is a member of the creative team, and so is usually privy to the rehearsal reports, the production reports, et cetera, et cetera. Just like an intimacy coordinator is a head of department, and so being honored as such, being part of the production meetings, et cetera.
Thanks.
Final question. Hi, how are you?
Hi,
Ooh,
I'm great.
make it a good
Thanks for
one.
tonight, guys. It's been so good. I just wanted to ask, we've talked so much about the prep required beforehand, but I wanted to get a sense of what happens after the scene. Like you've talked a little bit about feedback and evolving, the practice, but also like, is there reporting that you guys do? And if something does go wrong, where does liability sit? Like, how does this whole thing close out? Hopefully your presence there is enough that nothing does go wrong, but what does the end look like in this role?
Yeah, is there the whole process?
So with a lot of actors, you end up talking about closure, and that, afterwards, even just making sure, and at least in coordination, that there is a closing out between those actors, even if it's just hey, because usually a scene ends and everyone gets whisked away, and just stopping them and saying, hey, she's done for the day. I just want to make sure you two had a moment to say thank you to each other. And quite often it's like, oh, thank you so much for today, and hugs and whatnot, and like something that gives them a bit of a closing moment for them. As far as paperwork goes, so there is a on-set report that I ask any of the intimacy coordinators at HBO to fill out, or to at least have their own on-set report. I don't need to dictate what that on-set report is. And that is to keep in their own personal locked files. Oftentimes, at least in the US, and I know this seems to be quite different in Australia and New Zealand, this does not go back to production unless it needs to go back to production. And you need to have those files so that if something does happen or if something comes back later, we need to circle back to that. And especially if it comes back to me and it's an intimacy coordinator that's been working on a production, like, can I see the notes from that day? Can I see the on-set report from that day, so that we know exactly what it is that happened? Me personally, I keep my notes app open on my phone. I have many locks on my phone. And I am doing like a check-in of like 8:03, got to set, check-in with MH at this time. Any specific things that happened, number of setups, how things went, if any events occurred that I think is worth noting. And as far as liability, have insurance. Have liability insurance. In general, do I want to say that? They're usually not, probably not. Yeah, no, I'm going to leave it at that.
I guess it's like nurses, on-set nurses as well, that come with their own insurances and their own
Yeah.
tracking and everything. So it seems like it's a similar process.
Yeah.
And just to kind of add on the theater side, again, it's a little different. There's a transition phase where like everyone's been like, oh yeah, we're all here for you, we're working and it's great. And then it opens and then all the creative team just like go away and you're like, oh, it's just us then. And depending on the content of the show, occasionally there will be reach out from actors to be like, this is getting a little hard to hold. My closure practices aren't working in the way they were before. I need a little more, because there's an accumulation of the work, and if you don't have robust closure and like release practices, it can stay. So sometimes, I've had situations where I've had actors reach out. And then, when and what's kind of nice is that there's these very clear moments opening, right? And then all the creative team fuck off and it's theirs. and then there's closing, and it's the last show, and that in itself is a kind of ritual that closes things out. And I'll encourage, an extra closing to be able to leave that all behind. So because in theatre it kind of drifts on a little bit, there isn't really the end until we're not doing it anymore.
And as part of the process, the actors and director have my contact information, and I always tell them at the end of the day, I try to head back to base camp, unit base here, and just even connect with them as they're leaving, of just like, hey, thank you so much for your work today. You've got my number. If you need anything, please reach out. And I have had actors reach out afterwards, just even to say like, thank you so much. I felt really taken care of, or like, hey, I've got questions about this one thing that happened when we were on set, or this one shot. And then I'll either communicate with them or go to the producers if I need to get answers about one thing or another.
Speaking of closure. Thank you very much. I'm incredibly grateful for everything that you both do. You're awesome.
Thank you,
Keep
Neil.
doing it. And yeah, hopefully we're all lucky enough to be working with the next generation of.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Neil.
Thank you.
Weren't they amazing? I just wanted to say on behalf of the MEAA and the Equity Foundation, thank you to all of you. Neil's day being on a film set meant that he started really early and he was coherent the whole way through. So thanks, Neil.
I won't remember this. This is
To Alicia and Claire, though, 11 days they've been here imparting the knowledge, educating our intimacy coordinators and intimacy directors. Here's some of the things that I got from tonight, though, is we wouldn't just put two stuntmen and say, just keep going till we get the shot we want. And I think that really spoke to me, because that's what we're talking about here. The safety of what you do and the way that it happens. And so we have to ensure as an industry we are empowering these roles. And the other one that I really liked was that the process starts and the conversations continue. I think we got lots of really good tips. As an industry, we've been working and walking together in the right direction. And I'm excited for when you come back next time and our intimacy coordinators and directors are telling you their stories of how they work to make the New Zealand and Australian industry the safest industry in the world. So on behalf of our sponsors, I say thank you to all of you, and Media Super for those, sorry Zoom participants, but for those in the room, Media Super's put on some drinks to celebrate that you got out of your houses. So once again, thank you so much, and thank you to all of you.